bucket course. This is 8 years of bucket courses since we began our classes. So we're especially happy to have you here this morning. I'm Joanne Bundy, and while you are silencing your cell phone and turning on your tea coil, I want to draw attention to the evaluation sheets that you have on your chair this morning. It is a requirement, but if you have comments or suggestions that you would like to make for the planning committee for the bucket courses, please fill that out, and you can leave it on the table in the hallway during the break or after class this morning. We especially appreciate comments on the current course, and I also want to remind you of Michael Latham's Open Wednesday class that he had prior to George's course on World War II home front. If you have comments to make about that, we will be interested in hearing that too. The planning committee will be meeting next week to begin our plans for next fall. And so any suggestions you have for topics that you would like us to explore, or lectures that you would like us to see if we could get, please put that on your evaluation form too. And now it's time for the last session of stories from Professor of History, Professor George Drake, and his topic of Joe Rosenfield and Grinnell College. Welcome back again, George.
Well, thank you very much, Joanne. It is an honor to be involved in this last bucket course for this year. Before you get too relaxed, I think we need to recognize your birthday today and sing happy birthday to Joanne. We're not telling how old she is, but happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Joanne, happy birthday to you. All right, well, here we are, the last of this series on Joe Rosenfield and the college, and as you're seeing, now that we're into this phase of 59 years of Joe's trusteeship, it's at least as much about Grinnell College as it is about Joe, but it's pretty hard to separate the two. And you'll remember that I began with a story about Joe's family and his upbringing, and particularly his relationship with the retail department store in Des Moines and then generally in Iowa, Yonkers, and the influence I believe that culture, Yonkers culture, had on Joe. Then we had a session on Joe as a student at Grinnell from 1921 to 1925. Then last time I spent a lot of time on the first president that Joe worked with, Sam Stevens, and the fact that Joe resigned from the board for 6 months over Sam, and then came back when Sam was obliged to resign. And then we got into Howard Bowen, and I described Howard's tenure as president as one of the two most important in the college's history in terms of setting a pattern for the college, and in a way, in sort of transformation. And George Gates in the late 19th century, and then Howard Bowen, who really turned around a struggling regional institution and developed it into a growingly strong national institution. And I didn't quite finish I didn't finish a lot of the things I wanted to say about Howard, but I'm going to skip much of it. But there are just a couple of three things I want to mention, and it's particularly important to mention the one thing that I thought Howard wasn't very good at, which was dealing with student disruption. I mentioned last time that when you go through those trustee minutes, you never see any reference to the national foundations and efforts to solicit grants from those foundations until Howard comes, and then they're all over the place. And most people know this, but the college got 3 grants from the Ford Foundation with Howard. And I can tell you from personal experience that one of the major roles of a college president is to represent the institution to the outside world. I think that's kind of obvious. But the impression that you can make on foundations is exceedingly important, and it's predominantly the president who's able to make that impression. You have material that you bring, and the college has to be solvent and forward-looking and on the rise, I think. Foundations are pretty good at picking up on institutions on the rise, not those on the decline. And so I can say from personal experience that that's really important. And Howard had a wonderful way of presenting himself and the college to these foundations. And it's really quite unprecedented for a single college in a period of 9 years to get 3 grants from something like the Ford Foundation. The first and the last were challenge grants. And the trustees had to decide how much they would ask for, because whatever they asked for, they would have to double it with donations. So you've got to have a development office and a president that can go out and raise that money. The first grant was for $1 million, so the college had to go out and raise $2 million, and it did. And the last grant, which came in the early 60s, was for $2 million, and the college had to go out and raise $4 million, which it did. And again, Sam Stevens would not have been able to do that, and Howard did it. And each time they closed it out earlier than the actual schedule called for. Then Ford, in between, Ford just gratuitously said to Grinnell, we want you to use some money to show the world how undergraduate principles of economics should be taught. Well, Howard was an economist, and the one thing, I mean, Stevens had had a lot to do with hiring faculty, and Howard set a context, a culture for hiring of faculty, but predominantly the departments did it, not he. But in the case of economics, which I'll have to say, when Howard came, was in some disarray. It was notorious among students for having some pretty easy courses, and that's economics. And Howard transformed that department and became one of the strongest at the college, and indeed, our current, even to this day, our economics department produces more PhDs per capita than all but 3 or 4 departments in the country. So it's really a very strong department, and that happened in Howard's time. And so Ford reached out and said, we'd like you to show how that can be. Also, how to teach sort of world affairs so we can prepare future diplomats and future non-government organizations, people who go out and work in the developing world. And so the college was able to hire 2 new economics professors, 1 new political scientist, and 1 new historian. So 4 faculty positions. But these things from grants are never free. The college had to commit to keeping those faculty in place when the grant ran out. So money was going to have to be found to pay for those 4 faculty salaries. But this is probably Exhibit A of Howard's ability with the improvements in the college to attract important grant funds. Another thing I would have spent time on, but I'm just going to mention it, a considerable building program on campus. The campus that some of us in this room remember was largely a collection of early 20th century and late 19th century buildings. We remember Old Blair Hall. We remember Magoon. We remember the alumni building, or whatever it was called, where the music department was, I can remember listening to music in there, and the stairs creaked so badly you could hardly hear the music as people went up and down. It was a terrible building. Well, those are all gone. And they're replaced by Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill buildings, the Fine Arts Center, and Berlin Library. And Howard loved Walter Nash, the architect, and Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill of Chicago. They were the designers of the Air Force Academy. So if you visited the Air Force Academy, you know the kind of thing that SOM did. But you would visit the Grinnell campus, and you know the kinds of things that SOM did. So they did Berlin, the Fine Arts Center, the Forum, Norris, I don't think they trumpet that as one of their greatest accomplishments. The President's House, and later with Glenn Leggett's time, they're going to do the PUC. So the campus is very definitely, it's I mean, all you can say about Grinnell College architecture is it's eclectic. It's all over the place. When you go to St. Olaf, and you know, anywhere you are at St. Olaf campus, you're at St. Olaf, because there is, there is a St. Olaf architecture. We don't have any of that right now, and each of the presidents who's come along has had some influence on that. Well, I won't go on about that because I have private views. I don't have private views. They should remain private. But when Howard went to the University of Iowa as president, well, guess who the architect at Iowa was? Skidmore, Owens, and Walter Nash. So he fell in love with that style of architecture, and it's an important style, and it definitely helps to define the Grinnell campus. I think that the North and South Campus dorms are the most defining buildings on the campus, and thank goodness. But the SOM buildings, particularly if you're going on east on 6th Street Avenue, you definitely see a lot of it, Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill. All right, so that's as much as I'm going to say about Howard's building program. And now, let's see, I'm going to make sure I have, now I'm going to get into the area of Howard's greatest difficulty. He left Grinnell in 1964. So we had a 9-year presidency, and I remember him telling, I was a sabbatical replacement on the Grinnell campus in 60-61, and Howard had been president my senior year, so we knew each other a little bit, and I did have a few sessions with him. And I remember him telling me, no one should be president of the same institution for more than 10 years. That gives you enough time to leave your stamp on the institution, but not yourself to grow jaded or the institution to grow jaded about you. And I kind of think I took that on board. I lasted 12 years, but I knew it shouldn't go longer than something around 10 years. I mean, I thought Howard was right about that. So Howard leaves under something of a cloud, because he finally has hit something that he just doesn't know how to manage. And you can see it in the trust. I mean, obviously there's more to look at than the trustee minutes, but if you're looking there, you don't see any missteps until you get to the beginnings of the student revolution. And then Howard certainly confesses, I don't know how to handle this. This is beyond me. This is not something that I'm very good at. Part of this story will begin, it begins with Howard's time, but really goes into Glenn Leggett's time. I'm going to tell a little bit about the dorm that never was. The college makes a plan to build a dormitory beginning in 1963, and in 1968, I might as well go ahead and tell it, all right, now I'm into it. By 1968, they finally decide not to do it. But by the time they get to 1968, the cost is $4,275,000. It's going to be a women's dormitory. It will be just to the west of Lutz. So you'll sort of enclose the quadrangle area of South Campus. There'll be Main and Mears at one end, and the new dorm that never was at the north end. It would house 150 women. The plan was to draw every student from town onto campus. We were going to really be a residential college and not have this business of a few juniors and seniors being able to live off campus. So we'll be fully resident. And that was definitely Howard's concept. So Howard gets the ball rolling. And it's interesting to look at the trustee minutes. It comes up at every meeting. They make further plans. SOM is going to build it. The architect's been chosen. They're getting so far as to choose a contractor. It just never happens. So by the time you get to about, it's in Glenn's time now, 1965, 66, you can begin to see some hesitation, but they aren't stopping their planning. And this is the reason I mention it is a dramatic example. Who's making the decision? Not the administration, not the trustees. The students are making it. The students are voting with their feet. I mean, you're going into the period when they want co-educational dorms. They want to live in town with their girlfriends and boyfriends openly. You know, the pill is in the pill. We've got the pill now, so we're not so worried about unexpected pregnancy and so on. The students aren't going to come trooping back on campus, and they sure as heck are not going to 150 women dorm. Student body's growing, but we're moving step by step toward coeducational living.
And they're going to tear down the one and only swimming pool. I mean, that was an issue.
Yeah, sure. Well,
because the dorm would have.
What Tommy is referring to is the fact that we had this wonderful swimming pool just to the east of the tracks. Just right now we've got oil fuel tanks buried there in that hole for in case the gas run, you know, they shut off the gas. That pool, which was built in Joe's time, was a wooden structure on a concrete deck. The structure didn't even meet the deck. There was about an inch between the walls and the deck, so in the winter you got a lot of ice built up. The most famous thing about it was the diving well. There's a low building, so how are you going to dive? Well, they put a little cupola above the diving board, and the divers would disappear in them and then come down. And Bob Noyce was famous. He was a varsity diver, conference championship diver at college. For when he did his practice dives, he'd go up and hit the ceiling with his fist and then come down. It really psyched out the opponents. And we don't dare spring too high. Yeah, that's what it disappeared. I'm not sure. I didn't say anything about what the plans were to replace it, but yeah. So, well, of course, we did replace it with the overmill.
It was 58 when they replaced it.
Yeah. So, on to the. So that's. I don't need to say more about that because we do need to go along. But it's in Glenn Leggett's time that they find, and John Norris is chair of who was a classmate of Joe's and CEO of Lennox, and then retired, was chair of the Buildings and Grounds Committee. And there's a lot of verbiage about how now the town can absorb our students, and student residential patterns are changing. This is 1968 on the absolute cusp of the co-ed dorm. So that's the dorm that never was. So the students toward the end of Howard's time are pushing to eliminate women's hours. Now, most of the people in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, and some of you, many of you, lived through it. I'm ashamed of myself because as a student in that period of the 50s, enjoying all the privileges of being a male, which were virtually no restrictions, and having housekeeping staff make our beds at times, certainly cleaning our rooms. And the women on the other side of the campus, freshman year, were being locked up at 8 o'clock during the week. They were allowed out to 10 on Friday and 11 on Saturday. Now the upper class students had it really easy. 10 o'clock on the weeknights and virtually midnight. Now, the college thought it was really regulating sexual mores here, but of course, if you stayed out all night, who would be the wiser? Because once the doors were locked, the women had to check in through Maine. And there was a monitor there, monitoring how late they were and so on. And they had to have study halls when they got so many late minutes and so on. MJ?
George, we had baffle board check the rooms as freshmen. If you were not there at 7:45 before mid-sems, you were reported.
So only the upper class students could get away with being out. That I didn't know. It's even worse than I thought. Now, I mean, what's the philosophy? We will control the men by controlling the women. And it was true. At 10 o'clock, a little after 10 in the men's dorms, you might as well not try to study. The place was up for grabs as the guys came back from dates. Yelling around, screaming, and so on. But we had no regulation. So it was an extraordinarily sexist system. And you could kind of keep the lid on the campus by control. If you control the women, you have a lot of control over the men too, but not direct control, indirect control. So the students, in our time, I don't know, I don't want to get into it, but it was concern, but I would say not agitation, but by the time you get into the 60s. And remember, and this is important, I think, MJ and I were talking about this yesterday afternoon as we were walking our dogs. When were these students born? Those of us who were there in the 50s were born before World War II and lived through World War II, remembered World War II, and were conditioned by World War II. But you get well into the 60s, and you got people, beginnings of the baby boomer generation, born of families who had gone through World War II and fought in World War II, but were born in 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, those years. That's a different culture that they grow up in. And they're not nearly as likely to accept arbitrary rules as previous generations had. So they're really beginning to push, and it begins to hit. And the good side is the demographics are turning around. There are more students available. We can grow the student body, we can grow the quality, and it helped Howard do all of that. But also brought in people who are going to be much less quiescent about these regulations. So they're pushing for elimination of women's hours, eliminate the prohibition on cars. I mean, we had a prohibition. It was honored in the breach as much as in the law. Hank Brown, the dean of men, when I was a student, who had been the football coach and therefore knew a lot about what the guys were up to. He was notorious for someone would be walking out in town to get the car or the garage that they rented from somebody's house. Hank could see him and say, "Can I give you a ride?" "Oh no, Dean Brown, no." "I insist." Get in and hit him right to the garage and say, "Is this far enough?" They knew they better get rid of the car. It was a very subtle way of trying to enforce that. They wanted easing of the drinking rules, and they wanted to expand dorm visitation hours. They're not in Howard's time talking about co-ed dorms, but they want to at least visit each other in the dorms. Co-ed eating was of interest as well. That's, I'm sort of ashamed to say, the only issue I took on my senior year was, let's have some co-ed eating. I met with Bowen, and so we did work it out. But the food service was just apoplectic about this. How can we know how many people are going to be in this kitchen, in this door, this dining hall, if they can just go anywhere? So anyway, these were the kinds of issues that Howard was beginning to deal with. And he confessed to the board that he didn't know how to deal with it. And he said, "What I'm telling the students is that when their behavior improves, I will negotiate with them." And when you read these minutes, you know, and I have to, none of us are any smarter. I went through this at Carver College. I was the dean in the late 60s and early 70s. You didn't have much of an idea what's coming. They just don't know what's coming. So they're trying to deal with it with old ways we've always dealt with it. And we're moving into a period when it's just not going to work. And I'll stop here to say, big change, Vietnam. 1964 on, a little bit earlier than that really gets started, but it begins to become an issue at least by 64. I remember, as a starting faculty member at Colorado College in 1964, we were debating Vietnam. And I remember I didn't know whether we should be there or not. After all, we're not going to repeat the problems of World War II and appease. We've got to stand up to the communists and so on. This was academics discussion. They weren't quite sure what we should be doing. Well, by the time you get to the late 60s and into the early 70s, there doesn't seem to be much doubt, at least on campus, college campuses. And what we cannot forget is, particularly when you get into the lottery, the guys are going to have to, some of them are going to have to go fight in that war. They intensely do not believe in it. There's no sense of patriotic fervor behind that war for the college student. But it's an existential issue. And you wonder why today college students can be so blasé about some of these issues. Well, they're not going to have to serve the volunteer army. They're not going to have to serve. But that wasn't the case in the 60s and 70s. They were going to have to serve. Some of them are going to Canada. When you think of how drastic that is. So when you try to see the underlying things that are going on with the student revolution, I'd say above everything else, it's Vietnam. And college administrators represent the establishment. I mean, I was an administrator in that period, and I can remember trying to deal with students who had absolutely zero respect for me. But not for me, or a person. You have that position, dean of the college. You're part of the establishment. We want nothing to do with the establishment. And it was very difficult to reason. I mean, and one of my reliefs, I'm being too autobiographical here, but when I came as president of Grinnell by '79, we're past the Vietnam War. And even though Grinnell was a more radical place than Colorado College, I found it could actually reason with students. We could begin, there was some modicum of respect for the college president. Not a lot, but some. Remember the register, they interviewed some students when I first arrived. They said, "Oh, that kid over in Nolan House." So they referred to me. But at least you could sit down and maybe negotiate and get somewhere. So you've got Howard on one end, who's saying, I won't even negotiate with them until they improve their behavior. And then you got to go through all of you have to get to the point where when you actually negotiate with students, you can get somewhere. So this is what's going on at the very end of Howard's time. He, in the fall of 1963, the Carnegie Foundation had a wonderful program for college presidents and their wives to travel the world. And Howard, as a prominent college president, was invited, and he took Lois, and they left in November and came back in March. Left in November of '63, came back in March of '64, and by the time he came back, he then announced he was resigning to become president of the University of Iowa. So somehow this negotiation may have gone on while he was on that tour. But so Howard more or less followed his pattern of not being president for, so he was short of 10 years. He did it for 9 years at Grinnell. So that's, I think, all I've been planning to say about Howard. And now I'm going to go on to the Glenn Leggett administration. Glenn is the last one I'm going to refer to by the individual. When we get beyond Glenn, I'm just going to be a mishmash of college presidents till end of Joe's time as a trustee. But Glenn's time is exceedingly important to talk about for two basic reasons. This is the period when the endowment begins to take off. And I will, if you happen to have this back page of that first handout, which details the endowment growth, I'll refer to that every once in a while. And you'll see, if you look at it, Glenn begins in 1965, and by the time you get to 1970, I'm going to talk about Howard Buffett, Warren Buffett becoming a trustee, and that's 1968. Then's when the thing begins to really take off. And it's been a steady and important endowment growth, but it's going to become a conflagration of endowment growth from 1970 on. I can tell you the presidents like to take credit for this. The endowment growth grew nicely while I was president. I had nothing to do with it. Zero to do with it. And that's pretty much the case right along. The trustees are doing it, particularly with the way that Howard and Joe work. So, Glenn became president in 1965. He had had a distinguished career before coming to Grinnell. He was a Middlebury, good liberal arts college graduate, Middlebury, a PhD at Ohio State, and served in the Navy in World War II. He taught English at MIT, Ohio State, and the University of Washington. Then at the University of Washington is where he fell into bad company and became the administrator. He became the vice president provost and then the provost at the university, which is sort of number 2 under the university president. And he was then recruited to Grinnell in 1965. And he walks in to the meat grinder. 65 to essentially 75, 10 years. And Russ could give you chapter and verse of those years. And Glenn has fortunately written about it, and Glenn is a beautiful writer, and has written about some of those experiences. I got to know Glenn very well. Eventually, I served on the board of trustees with him, and he was about as gracious and approachable a person as you could imagine. And I would say very, very much more apt for the period that he served than Howard was in. In a way, it was you're just hanging on, just trying to keep the institution functioning from day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. You never knew what was going to happen next. And the students, many of them are majoring in disruption or in they're bright kids, and the quality of students is much better than it's been. But they were wondering whether it's even moral to study when all of this is going on and needs to be changed. It's certainly, is it moral to go out and get a job? Is it to become part of the establishment? I mean, you talk to students in that area, they have no idea what they're going to do after they graduate. But the one thing they weren't going to do was get involved in this establishmentarian society, join the elites. The culture, it was, well, some of you were teaching in those years, and you can comment. I mean, you know, it was just a very, very interesting time. And I would say that Glenn deserves full credit for having, it was negotiating, day to day, negotiate through all of that, and Glenn did it. Now, at the same time, I'm going to come back to some of the specifics of the student revolution, but let's look first of all at the endowment, and since that brings Joe in. The way I can bring Joe in with the student thing is, and I'll do that, is that of all the board members, Joe understood at least as well, if not better than anybody else, what was going on. And I can remember him saying, just remember, they're undergraduates, they're young. They've got a lot of pressures on them. Let's try to understand them. Let's not condemn them. And Joe was the least condemnatory of the trustees. And just as he had in Howard's time, moving the essential things that needed to be done, he would move the essential kinds of things that, for example, when the college closed in 1970, he's the one that makes the motion on the board of trustees. We absolutely support the administrative position to close the college. When they created the student pub, I was a trustee at that time. I remember those discussions. That was a big deal. I mean, we were going to allow drinking on campus, and we had a 21-year-old drinking rule then. And I think it happened when I was president. We had to go to 18 because the federal government said you're going to lose your highway funds unless you make 18 the drinking age. In my view, when the drinking age was 21, we had the best drinking environment on campus that we've ever had or ever will have. Because drinking now is not an illicit activity, it's something that you do for social reasons. And the college wanted to open a pub, did open a pub. Faculty and students would gather on Friday afternoon and have a beer, that sort of thing. It was, I wasn't here on the campus for much of that, but my understanding, it was really a very nice thing. But to do that, you had to break, more than a century of college patterns, but also community patterns because of JB's restrictions about alcohol in the community. So you had to get the city council to approve a shift so there could be a pub on the college campus. Who made the motion? Joe Rosenfield made the motion. Who seconded it? Warren Buffett seconded it. That kind of leadership that Joe showed in the student revolution was important, and obviously even more important was his leadership in building the endowment. So, the story of Joe and Warren Buffett. And we've got, I'll take 5 minutes to get, maybe I can tell at least how they got together, a little bit about Joe and Warren. There was an Omaha couple, Dick and Betty Hillard. Now Betty it was a second marriage for her, and she had been married to Joe's cousin. So she knew him, he knew her. And they were close friends of Warren Buffett in Omaha. And they said to Warren, you know, there's this guy over in Des Moines, former relative of mine, etc., we think you would really enjoy. He's just the kind of person you would like, and he's also a very good investor. So they hauled Warren over to Des Moines to have a dinner with Joe, and they hit it off immediately. And then in the late fall of 1967, the college had a big symposium to kick off a fundraising campaign, and that was the one where Martin Luther King spoke. And Warren was blown away by the King speech. In fact, he still has it and hands it out to people in his office. That's the impression it made. And then immediately after that, Joe said, Warren, would you join the board of trustees of Grinnell and help us to raise a little money? Warren said, okay, Joe. So that's how Warren happened to come on to Grinnell Board of Trustees. Kinds of things that Warren, I read at the very beginning of the things that Warren has written for the foreword to this book. But Warren said, among other things, Joe is an extraordinarily generous and smart man. I'd never wanted to replace my real father, but after Dad's death, if I could have adopted Joe as my father, I would have. That's the kind of relationship they had. I'm going to read a couple of other things, and then we'll have a break and get into the actual story building the endowment. This is from I had a really good interview with Warren about Joe. I never heard him make any remark the whole time I knew him that was unkind or that didn't make sense. There's some people who are very bright and some who say a lot of dumb things, and then there's others that just don't. Everything he says makes sense. That was certainly true of Joe. Everything he says makes sense. And then finally, he would spend every Christmas with us in Laguna. He connected with all generations. He connected with the children. He connected with grandchildren. I mean, everybody loved him. It was this incredibly generous spirit, obviously, and he was fun to talk with. I mean, the guy had a fantastic sense of humor. I'll tell you a few of the things, which he did later, and I'm sure you have hundreds to illustrate it. He was very, very smart. We could talk politics. We could talk sports. We could talk business. We could talk family. Any subject he was fun to talk to. And my kids thought he was fun to talk to as well. He would stay with us a couple of weeks, year after year. We put in a special chair so he could go up and down the stairs and we did not want to have Christmas without him. And I never really saw any aspects of his behavior or personality or anything in any way that would turn people off. He just embraced humanity. Okay, with that, let's take a break.
And thank you for your birthday wishes. I'm not telling you my age, but I can tell you that George and I are in the same Grinnell College class, and he turned 83 this year. So here we're back to another old timer, George Drake.
Okay, Merle Zirkle told me something interesting that I did not know just during the break about Howard. She said that when she and Glenn were hired, and when the Durkees hired the same year? Was that?
Well, they were already here.
They were already here. Yeah. That Grinnell was written up nationally for being the first institution that would hire a couple who would share a job, which we do a lot now, and college is better. But think of the issue at Grinnell. You're trying to hire someone, they also have an academic spouse. And where is the academic spouse going to work? And you're in Grinnell, Iowa. And how they're going to travel a lot. We have it. We have people flying all over the country to be with their spouses. But because of our relative isolation, that would propel us, I think, to be one first institution to think about that. Because you aren't going to get that higher if the person can't bring the spouse. So anyway, that's a bit of information I'm very glad to have, Merle. All right. I'm going to do this pretty quickly with respect to what Joe and Warren did. In the trustee minutes, you begin to see some steps. As soon as Warren arrives, they create an aggressive investment fund. And they take some of the endowment money and put it there, and they'll take risky investments. And the main thing that needs to be said here is that Grinnell, when Joe was on the board, everything was different. I'll comment on it right now. I would say the Grinnell board, when I served on it and when I served under it, and the trustees were very clear to tell me when I became president, when they demoted me into the presidency, that I work for them now. George, you work for us now. So don't assume that because you've been our colleague that all is going to go smoothly. But in general, it was a very, I'd say almost sometimes chaotic board in terms of following procedures. They would decide to ask someone to be a trustee on the spur of the moment. I can't tell you, I won't go into all of how many times something was decided on the spur of the moment. When we bought the TV station, that was spur of the moment. None of us in the room had heard about that. But Joe and Warren had cooked it up. What happened there was Warren knew that the Avco stations, which were for sale, one in Cincinnati and one in Dayton, were underpriced. They were being sold for 2.5 times of annual earnings, and most stations were going for 3 or 4 times annual earnings. So these are bargains. Warren wanted to get one, but he was a major stockholder of the Washington Post, and if he had bought one, he would have filled up the Post's allowable TV stations. Newspapers can only own 5 TV stations. So he thought, if it's a good idea for me, it'd be a good idea for Grinnell. So he and Joe talked about it. And I sat there for an hour or so and heard a seminar from Warren about why this would be a good investment. And at the end of that time, we decided to do it. We had to borrow $9 million. We'd take $2 million of our own money and invest in a commercial TV station. No college had ever done that we were aware of. Most of the discussion then was how to keep the students out of the business of running the TV station. They would, climb onto that. Let's turn this into a voice for our concerns.
And the faculty were furious. I just remember, Dennis coming home and saying, "What on earth are we doing with a TV station?"
Yeah, Tommy's saying the faculty did not approve of this decision. And most of the discussion then was how we'll set up a separate board. Gardner Dutton will be the chair of it, and it'll be run separately from the Board of Trustees of Grinnell College. And it'll be a separate entity, so the students can't have anything to say about it. That's the way the board functioned in those years. I always felt as though I'd been run over by a steamroller after every meeting, because the things were flying around the room. We go over the agenda, and half the things that were decided had nothing to do with the agenda. It was semi-chaotic, but it worked because everybody trusted Joe. And if Joe was for it, we'll do it. And think of this board of trustees: Warren Buffett, Bob Noyes, Steve Jobs. I mean, with Buffett and Jobs, you have 2 of the principal business icons in contemporary American history. We're on the Grinnell board. Bob Burnett, CEO of Emeritus. Howard Bowen was on that board. I mean, this was a board of major hitters, and everybody turned to Joe. So that is an illustration, I think, better than anything I can think of, that shows the stature that Joe had. And a lot of discussion, this was about the time I was going out the door, that the board was being, he said, what do we do after Joe's dead? After Joe's gone, after Joe's not active? They recognized that their whole way of procedure was oriented around Joe. And it would going to have to change. And it is changed now. I'm not intimate with the board at all, but it's much more structured. Much more basing their decisions on metrics and so on. It's more what you would expect. Now, an aspect of all of this is that most boards of trustees are very ill-advised to do their own investing. It's almost a sure recipe for mediocrity. but Grinnell did its own investing. When I asked Warren, I said, did anybody on the board have anything to do with the investment that you and Joe? No. Did you and Joe ever disagree about investment philosophy? No. So, two people who are geniuses with respect to investment, extremely disciplined. For example, this happened after my time as president, but the college very heavily invested in Freddie Mac. I remember Warren talking about Freddie Mac. In the first year, Freddie Mac fell 28%. They didn't budge. And ultimately, the college made a ton of money out of Freddie Mac and got out of it before the 2008 disaster, when Freddie Mac was a big part of that disaster. Their philosophy was very few investments, value investments based on knowledge of the business and research into the business, and then hold it. So the college's investments were roughly, major investments, were 10 to 20 major investments is all. It was not what you call heavily diversified. But they would, it redounded, and when you see that endowment growth, that's the result of it. The Intel investment was slightly before Warren got on. That was an interesting investment. Typical again of Joe. Joe wanted to support young people of promise. And he and Bob got to know each other very, very well through board activities. And Bob was going to leave Fairchild and start his own company. And it was going to be called Intel. And he needed venture capital. And so he talked to Joe about it, and Joe then organized that he himself would invest $100,000. Another wonderful trustee, Sam Rosenfield, would invest $100,000, and they'd take $100,000 of the Grinnell endowment and put it into Intel, $300,000. Grinnell was 10% of the startup of Intel. And Joe's arrangement was, if we lose, it's my loss. If we gain, it's the college's gain. So it was all to be given to the college. And of course, it gained tremendously. The college sold it at about, when it was up at about 16 million. So 300,000 turned into 16 million. Wow. But as an article in the Money magazine by a man named Zweig indicates, the college probably lost at least $1 billion by prematurely selling Intel. The reason was, and I can remember this, is Bob Noyce saying, I am nervous about the college endowment being so heavily invested in my company. I don't like that responsibility. And anyway, he was urging the sale, and it happened. Warren now says, I can't remember why we did that. Because, I mean, our $1.8 billion endowment might be closer to $3 billion now if we held on to the Intel. So they didn't always make the best decisions, but, how can you criticize them for turning 300,000 into 60 million? So I think that's the bulk of what I want to say about their investment. Another big investment, again, this was it's happening while I was president. I remember all the discussion of it, and that's sort of the role I had as president. Gee, they're talking about this, they're talking about that. I wonder about that. But I'm not much of a financier, so. Sequoia Fund. There was a $1 million investment that turned into $600 million ultimately, their investment in Sequoia Fund. At one point in the late 90s, Grinnell was the largest single investor in an American mutual fund because of its involvement in the Sequoia Fund. Again, this was an extremely value-oriented fund with limited numbers of investors and so on. And they invested in it in the sort of halcyon days of the Sequoia Fund. So when you look at those figures, these are the kinds of investments that underlie those figures. And for the most part, they're unusual in the risk taken, and unusual in the amount of study and thought that went into them, and the amount of discipline it took to hold to these. So, I mean, it's a unique story. It's one that I will tell in some detail in the book, but I'm not the best person to be the analyst of all this. But it is a unique story for a college or almost any organization to have a combination of two people, Joe Rosenfield and Warren Buffett, and their skill and character, who are in absolute control of a series of investments over a 20-year period of time. And it was resulted from, in this very, I mean, the story that I tell in this book is of a struggling college, a lot, that has now become rich. And one of the things the college contends with today is how to handle that dramatic shift in such a short period of time. And does this put the college on easy street? I think the current administration has been able to convince us no. That in some ways, and I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes before I'm going to finish, it's an unsustainable model. And I'll describe how what that model is currently. And this endowment would have to keep growing, maybe not at the rate it has in the recent past, but still continue to grow a lot in order to sustain that model. In other words, some things may have to change. But also, let's put yourself in the development office of the college, the fundraisers. The generation that is in the best position to give are people of my generation, and maybe a little younger. We're in the best position to give. We went to an impoverished college. How in the heck do you think Grinnell College needs our money? Now, with that endowment. And it's just exponential from what we experienced. We're generous people, we're Grinnellians, and I think Grinnellians are generous, but we're going to give our money where it's most needed, and I'm not convinced Grinnell College needs it. And we're not like Harvard or Yale, or good old Harvard. Just the privilege of giving to good old Harvard, that's not Grinnell. It isn't a great privilege to give to Grinnell. Right? That's not the feeling that our alums had. That we're proud of our college, but not that way. But so they face a real challenge to go out there and they're going into a big campaign, and it's going to be a challenging thing. I think the current administration's done a pretty good job, better than the past one, explaining to people why, in fact, the college does need their money and why it should have its support. So I think having teased you with that, I think I will go quickly I'm going to go to that in with just a few remarks about the student revolution. I sort of set that up, but just to quickly remind people the kinds of things that went on in that student revolution that what Joe and others on the trustees had to try to adjust to. The shift to co-ed housing is a dramatic shift. And our dorms are wonderfully adaptable buildings. I mean, the main administration, when they built those dorms, smallish, 40, 50 students and so on, you can make a lot of adjustments. But also some basic adjustments. Bathrooms. Co-educational dorms with one bathroom per floor. Well, initially the women will go to the first floor and the men will go to the second floor. That lasted about, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months. They started putting up the dial-a-John system. Woman, don't care who comes in. Woman, only woman comes in. You know, put the dial where you want. And I wasn't here then. I remember how shocked I was at co-educational. We had some of the first institutions in America to have co-educational bathrooms. In conservative, Cornfield, Iowa, we're doing that. That's worth national news. And when the dorm renovation program was started under Glenn and then it continued well into my administration and so on, how do you get people to pay for dorm renovation? You don't. Joe paid for it, predominantly. It was Joe Rosenfield who funded. He loved those dorms, and for him it was a gift of love. But nevertheless, you had to have someone like Joe behind the scenes in order to make those adjustments, basic adjustments, to allow for relatively convenient co-ed living. Going back, this goes back actually to the very beginning of Glenn's time. This is a wonderful story because it relates to the current 50th reunion class. This is 1966-67. Women are agitating for elimination of dorm hours. Remember, they're only a year or so away from co-ed dorms. They're still holding to the dorm hours. And a woman named Carol Lauterbach called the fire marshal. And she said, you know what this college is doing? They're locking us into our dorms at 10 o'clock at night. A week later, the rules were lifted. That's, you wonder why it didn't happen before, but that's brilliant. And I hope Karen gets appropriately honored at the upcoming reunion. 69, the Playboy incident, which got national news. I remember reading about it in Colorado. Women disrobing in front of Hugh Hefner's #2 to protest against the way that Playboy treated the bodies of women.
Yes.
And with stringers around to cover it and photograph it, send it off to the New York Times, and so on. The student stringers. Students got pretty good at that, and the newspapers got pretty good. Grinnell's a hot spot. Let's get stories out of Grinnell. I remember having lunch once with David Krydner in my early time as trustee, and he said, how do you feel about the way the Register is treating Grinnell? And I said, that's not bad. He said, yeah, we're after Iowa State now. That was really interesting to hear the publisher of the Register tell you that. So they do have their interests that they can build up. The Attorney General, Richard Turner, is investigating the campus. The FBI is on campus in those years. ROTC becomes a big issue. The only actual violence on the destruction on the campus was a couple of windows in the ROTC building during this occupation. So we didn't have what, say, the University of Wisconsin had, with bombs going off, and so on. The closing of the college in 1970, not so hard to understand when you think it was Kent State and the bombing of Cambodia, and the judgment of the administration, which the trustees concurred, was that it was too volatile on campus to continue. So that's what happened. The most positive thing, apart from Burrell, came out of all this, you know, the students are, they would argue, we're the majority of this institution. It's for us, we should be deciding. And they're after the curriculum. And that's when Burrell came forward with the plan that we still have, called then No Requirements, now called on the radio Individually Advised Curriculum. And we still have it, getting rid of the various requirements, distribution requirements, and so on, and the creation of the tutorial. That's a very, in my opinion, a very positive outcome of those years. So, I won't go on about that. When I came as president, there were at least 2 or 3 high schools in Iowa that would not allow a Grinnell admissions officer through the door, and Marshalltown was one of them then.
That would be me.
And I actually went as president around the various high schools in the state to encourage them to send their students to Grinnell, but there was a sense in the state that Grinnell was a corrupting place. Good Iowa kids shouldn't be coming to Grinnell. So that's what happens there. Now I have a whole other section that we're going to skip, but it's really just to say that the 80s and 90s are building on the opportunities presented to the college because of a growing endowment. So it was, I think when I was president, it was a very nice time because we could do things, but the endowment wasn't so big that you could go out and raise money because it wasn't so big that we didn't really need that money. I'm going to give you an epilogue. I need to stop at about 20 after, and so I think I can handle this. I'm putting an epilogue in the book, and here's the background of it. In April, Warren Buffett has his famous stockholder meeting, oftentimes at the Nebraska Furniture Mart in Omaha. And last year's, not this year's, last year, he was quoted as saying, you know, I was trustee of a little college a number of years, and when I joined the trustees, they had a $10 million endowment, and then it grew to well over $1 billion, and they haven't done anything with it. Well, Bloomberg News got hold of that. They figured out quickly it was Grinnell College, so they're calling up Grinnell. Okay, do you have a response? And communications department got in touch with me and so on, and of course Reynard. And Reynard had not been able to persuade Warren to beat him. Warren sort of keeping a distance. Joe's gone, so his connection's gone. And it turns out that Warren was really embarrassed by this. He didn't think it would be picked up or that they'd identify the college. Well, anything Warren Buffett says becomes national news. So he said, yeah, Reynard Warren said, would he be willing to meet with me and with him and me? And he said yes. So we went over there, and Reynard had a set of slides that they were in paper form to present to him to show what the endowment had done. And when we got in there, Reynard asked, how much time have we got? And Warren said, as much time as you want. So we had a good hour and a half with him. And I'm putting all this, the gist of it in the epilogue of the book, because it's a wonderful way of showing what that endowment has been able to do, particularly for access to higher education. Only 40 colleges and universities out of 3,000 in America are need blind in admissions, which means you admit people without any consideration of their ability to pay, and then you guarantee you're going to provide enough financial aid that they can come. So you don't just admit them and say, well, sorry, you don't have enough aid, you can't come. Grinnell, you're guaranteed to have the aid in terms of grant and loan that will allow you to attend it if you're admitted. And we're only 40 colleges that do that now. Warren had said he didn't know if the student body had grown much. Well, when he was on the board in the early days, 1,150 and 68, it's now 1,665. So it's about a, let's see, well, it's a significant, I have that somewhere, the percentage of growth. I'm not going to try to figure it now. 24% of our students are Pell eligible, which means that they need almost total financial aid. And if they were having to pay for their own education, they could go to community college, that would be it. That's 24%. 28% of the students have all of their tuition covered by their financial aid. Grinnell gets the least from tuition of our comparison group of colleges. 15, Amherst, Bowdoin, Carleton, Colorado College, Davidson, Kenyon, McAllister, Oberlin, Pomona, Reed, Smith, St. Louis, Swarthmore, Vassar, Washington, Lee, and Williams are our comparison group. We get the least tuition in terms of providing for the cost of students of any of those institutions. The endowment covers 51.41% of the budget. Comes from endowment income. When I was president, it was 20%, and the trustees thought it was too much then. They're really worried about. This is when we talk about an unsustainable model. Can you keep on doing that with the endowment covering over half of the cost of educating the students? Grinnell students graduate with the least debt of any students in the state of Iowa. The average debt is $13,982 at Grinnell. The average debt for all the other Iowa colleges is $29,730. So it's way, way below this is 2014 figures. U.S. News and World Report top 25 highly selective colleges. Grinnell has been, in these good days, has been anywhere from 8th to about 16th in the highly selective college category in their metrics for determining this. So of these 25 most highly selected colleges, the most economically diverse are the following three: Amherst, Grinnell, and Vassar. So we're more economically diverse than any of those other 25 except for those three, and we're the most economically diverse of any of the Midwestern colleges. We're 9th among the 25 colleges in the percentage of domestic students of color at 22%, and ahead of all the other Midwestern colleges. I can tell you that is dramatic. We struggled when I was president to get at 10%. And try this, we try that, we try this. And some things worked sort of, but how do you attract students of color to the cornfields of Iowa? We have one of the biggest problems in terms of location for students of color. But the campus is transformed. You want to get to a critical mass where you no longer think, gee, there's a black student. And because when you add the international students and the domestic students of color, it is a diverse campus. And you stop thinking about it. It's part of life. It's what it is. And that is dramatic. Graduation rates. The top 25% of students in income, 86% graduate. The lowest 25% of students in income, 84% graduate. There's a lot going on now in higher education about fairness. I mean, it always is, but particularly now, talking about the inability of colleges to reach disadvantaged students while they're there. You get them there, and then the education of the students fails. And we've had plenty of experience with that in the past, but not as much experience now. I mean, there's only 2% difference between the top 25% economically and the bottom 25% in their graduation rate. So somehow we are solving that really big problem. Study abroad percentage is Pell eligible students and the other students at the same percentage. 54% of our students study abroad. Doesn't make any difference what your economic background is. You can study abroad. Your financial aid travels with you. Now, there's my recitation of the basic statistic. None of this would be accomplished at that level without the endowment that Joe and Warren built. And I can tell you at the end of that presentation, Warren was blown away. I mean, because he cares about access. And in fact, that discussion in that stockholders meeting came out of this general discussion about the high cost of higher education and how we're pricing people out of the opportunity to go to college. And yet Grinnell hasn't done that. Even though when you look at our sticker price, it blows you away. But then, the rest of it goes out the door. I mean, not coming in the door, really, most of that sticker price, because we're sustaining it with the endowment. But the question is, how long can that be sustained? But, Joe's, well, I guess I'll just stop and say, Joe's story is a wonderful story in a lot of ways, but those statistics are part of the wonder of the story. And I've said, and I guess I can say without fear of contradiction that I think Joe did more for his college than any trustee in America today, certainly, maybe than any trustee ever. Probably, I can't say that, but certainly any trustee in America today. So thank you very much for your attention. This has been fun to do. So.
Thank you very much, George. George, we have a certificate of appreciation for you from the Planning Committee and from all of us. And that certificate covers more than just this course. George has given his adult life to educating people of all ages, and we are delighted to be the beneficiaries of your lifetime of teaching, George. And this certificate is only the tip of the iceberg, and these people are just a fraction of the people who thank you for your dedication to education. Thank you very much. And as you know, with each course, we give the Drake Community Library $50 to contribute to the Art Hyman Gift Fund. That fund goes to purchasing new books for the library. And speaking of Art Hyman, would you please come up, Art? As you know, Art Hyman has been a volunteer and supporter of the bucket courses since they began 8 years ago. And this very lectern from which we speak was made by Art as part of his contribution. But Art has a very special distinction. Of all the volunteers that we have, Art is the only person who has attended every single class of the bucket courses for the past 8 years. Weaver has put together a list of all the classes that Art has attended, and we will give that to him. Art has to be the smartest man in town.
Thank you for those kind words, Joanne. It's been my privilege and education to be with you each time. When I look over the group, many friends that I've known for many years. I first came to Grinnell in 1943 to the college as part of the Army Specialized Training Program. Little did I know, a California kid, that I would come back to make my home in one of the best communities that I know of. And thanks to you, Joanne, to George, and to all of the wonderful presenters we've had over the years that have given us a chance to continue our education. Even at 95, I'm finding I can still learn.
We have other thank yous to give at the end of this session of courses before we take our summer break. We want to thank the Drake Community Library for giving us this space and for giving us the staff support that we need to make this work. And of course, Mayflower, who provides all the goodies for us each week. And this very special thanks to our planning committee, who are an incredible group of people. I'd like this planning committee to stand and be recognized for all of the efforts and the success that we've had. And Jim Arms, who is here today. And most of all, we thank you. Without you, the rest of us wouldn't have anything to do or any reason to do it. So we thank you for your attendance and your support and your volunteer efforts for the 8 years that we have had the bucket courses. I hope that we will see you this summer for the ACES classes, which will be beginning June 14th. And then we'll see you all back again next summer, or next fall. In the meantime, have a wonderful summer. Thank you for coming.